it's Stephanie, and I wanted to do a video just to quickly talk about how I did on my 2018 reading resolutions, go through some statistics really quick, and then talk about my goals for my reading year in 2019. In 2018, I left things pretty open-ended. Rachel and I had just started Books in the Freezer. I really didn't want to go too hard on myself, and I'm really glad I did in retrospect. So I really only gave myself 3 goals. And I will say I kind of only went through with one of those goals. So the first thing I said was that I was going to decide on a reading challenge, which I never did. I know I looked at Reading Women, I looked at Book Riot, I looked at like Pop Sugar, Modern Mrs. Darcy, and I don't know if I just like didn't connect with any of them. I knew I was going to go into the year reading a lot of horror, and I didn't know if that was possible to do that alongside of a reading challenge that sometimes was very genre specific in a way that didn't quite mesh with like also reading a lot of horror. So I didn't do that. I also made a comment that I wanted to read more historical fiction, which that's one of those statements that I felt like the minute that I put it out into the atmosphere, there went my desire to do that. I really didn't go out of my way to pick up any historical fiction last year, so I also didn't follow through with that. But I will say is that on a whim, I listened to Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neville, and I fell in love with that, and it actually inspired me to look into more science fiction. So I did explore a genre, so if we just want to switch out what that genre was, because it wasn't historical fiction, then technically it was a success. I also made a comment that I wanted to read some of my larger books, and guys, I did it. I followed through on that. I read Gone with the Wind and Middlemarch, which were my 2 largest books on my shelves, and I did those as buddy reads with Kate, which proved to be a really successful method because I have a really hard time keeping my momentum with large books. I feel like even when things are picking up, I just lose the desire to pick up a book. Like I feel like my brain is saying this book should have ended by now. And it's not. You are like halfway through. So it worked out really well to have someone there that I felt accountable to, that was pushing me to keep going, and we could talk about things going on in the plot. So I did pick up some larger books in 2018. So that was really good. I do just have some quick stats. I don't have a ton, but just some quick stats on my reading in 2018 to go over. So last year, 54% of the authors I read were male and 46% were female. I'm actually pretty happy with that statistic. That is a lot more even than I thought it would be. I will say in 2019, I would like to read more female horror authors. I know in this statistic, those books, not a lot of them fall into horror. You know, there's like thrillers, general fiction, classics, and like a handful of horror stuff here and there, but for the most part, but yeah, not a lot of horror authors. So I would love if that statistic in 2019 features a lot more horror by women. 89% of the authors I read last year were white and 11 were people of color. I would of course love to improve that statistic and get that higher. And the reading spreadsheet that I'm using this year has a couple different types of diversity. So including things like sexuality and disability, and to just really get the full spectrum of expanding your horizons in what you're reading. So I am really hoping that I will see an improvement in that number in 2019. 5% were books in translation, and I will say like the one hard and fast resolution I have this year is to make an effort to read more books in translation, and of course ideally more horror in translation, which it's hard to find. I feel like I'm Googling things and I'm seeing the same couple titles pop up, and I am interested in reading those titles, but I'm also interested if there's just stuff I'm not seeing. So I'm hoping to maybe find a hidden gem, find a new favorite, and kind of go down a rabbit hole. That would be really great. Okay, so then in 2018, 40% of the books were audiobooks. I don't think that statistic is gonna change. Because of my job and where I work, I can wear headphones and I can listen to podcasts and music and audiobooks. So I do tend to listen to a lot of audiobooks at work. So I would say because of how much time I spend listening to audiobooks, I don't see that statistic going down at all, at least. 18% were ebooks, which is actually a lot higher than I thought it would be. I do want this year to at least read 1 ebook a month, because I currently have a Kindle Unlimited membership for the next few months. that I paid in advance for, and it's really great. There's a lot of great horror titles on there that it gives me access to, but you know, I actually need to use it. I actually need to make an effort to prioritize reading on my e-reader. So I'm hoping to do that. But I mean, that's close to 20%, which is pretty good and a lot better than I thought it would be, honestly. 8% of books were from my library. So that's not counting Libby, because that's usually where my audiobooks come from. That is physical copies, 8%. And I do want to increase that. I am lucky enough to live somewhere where I have a great library system, and I would love to utilize that more. Like, there's a lot of great titles, and surprisingly a lot of good horror titles that I can access and get my hands on. So I would love to utilize that more, you know, put things on hold and request things and pick them up, and just put a little more effort into pre-planning my reading in that way. And 34% were books that I own, which I'm really happy with. Like, that's pretty good. 34% is a good number, and I'm happy with that. So now for subgenres, 33% were horror, which again, I don't think that's gonna go down at all in 2019. 10% were short stories, which is a little misleading, because let's face it, a lot of those short story collections were horror. I mean, maybe all, so we might be looking at 43% horror technically. 6% were mysteries, 5% were historical fiction, 5% were fantasy, and 3% were sci-fi. So nothing too shocking there for me. For ratings, 1% of my ratings were 1 star, so I think that was like 1 or 2 books. I don't rate a lot of things 1 star because I DNF a lot. If a book is annoying me or upsetting me that much that it would get a 1 star from me, I am not going to put in the effort to finish it. So I think the 2 books that I gave 1 star to last year were graphic novels. So they were short enough that it wasn't that much of a time commitment. And I mean, that commitment didn't end up getting me anywhere because I rated them 1 star. 6% were 2 stars, 19% were 3 stars, 33% were 4 stars, and 12% were 5 stars. So 4 stars I think is my sweet spot, which I think if you watch these videos is normal. It's like, I liked it / I love it. And with my 12% being 5 stars, I mean, ideally I would love to give a lot of books 5 stars, but I think as a reader, and I'm sure as a reader, like, you know what it's like when you read a book and technically all the pieces are there, like there's characters and they have backstories, the plot moves in a competent way, like all the pieces are there, but for some reason you don't connect to it. It just doesn't touch something in you, and maybe it's because I'm more of like an emotional reader. I do need to feel like a connection to the story. So here's to hoping I find more of those in 2019. So I know I've mentioned a lot of these along the way, but here are my listing my 2019 resolutions. I do want to do the Pop Sugar reading challenge. I have written it down in my bullet journal, which it makes it law now. I have to follow it. And I like it because it feels like the most challenging. I think probably just because of the quantity. I think there's like 50 prompts, and then there's advanced prompts, and I think they just get goofy, like this thing in the title, like a zodiac sign in the title, like a piece of clothing on the cover, and they seem wacky enough. I feel like I can still read the amount of horror I want and still kind of push myself to find something that fits that. I would like to, as I said, read more horror by female authors this year. I really need to go through last year and see how many titles were actually like female horror authors, so that I can see, you know, if I improve upon that. I did a video on rereading 3 of my favorite books from my adolescence. So that is East of Eden, 100 Years of Solitude, and Little Women. So I'm hoping to get that done this year. I also set my Goodreads goal at 150 books, which is what I set it last year, and I like barely made it at 153 books. I think I got some kind of like a second wind the last week of December, and I finished like 2 or 3 extra books, but I was like to the wire. At least that's what it felt like. And like I mentioned, more physical library books. So those are my reading goals for next year and my reflections on how I did last year. Let me know if you're the kind of person that keeps resolutions or how you feel about them, or if you have any suggestions for me in fulfilling these goals. I would love to hear from you, so please talk to me in the comments. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to see you again soon. Bye!